experience you can count on. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left podcast and organising podcast that drops every Friday, that dives into the progressive campaigns of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And it is the Northern Territory election next Saturday, August the 24th, and we're going to be talking to Ryan Neve, long-term Labor campaigner from the NT, to preview that election. If you like the show, don't forget to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast or Spotify when done listening to the show, and leave us a review. And to support the show, obviously join Socially Democratic Patreon. And for everything else, hit us up at Dunn Street on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. All right, let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Tuesday evening, a glorious Tuesday evening on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. The weather has finally turned. I know it will turn back again, but I'm certainly taking this while I can. And speaking of glorious evenings, if you were in the Northern Territory right now, it's August, it's the dry season, and you would be treated to some of the most spectacular sunsets and glorious evenings yourself. And I have memories of that experience at the 2016 election. Yeah, I forgot then. My God, that was a long time ago. Okay, there you go. And there's another election coming up on the 24th of August, Saturday the 24th of August. The Northern Territory goes to the polls. And to join me on today's podcast to preview that election is someone who's a good campaign friend of mine. He has been around since time began. He's campaigned on every single NT election campaign since 2000. He just told me off air that he's also worked for every single Labor chief minister ever in the history of the party in the Northern Territory. That in itself is a feat. And for that reason alone, he has to be on this show to talk about the preview of the election campaign. Ryan Neve, welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for having me. And I would love to have said coming to you from the lands of the mighty Larrakia people in Darwin today, but I am down in Launceston at the moment, and it was very nice. It wasn't as cold as people would tell me it was going to be. So lovely to be here.
So Southern Australia's been treated with a little bit of cheeky sunshine over the last couple of days, so we'll take it when we can get it. Look, before we jump into the NT politics, I just want to introduce you to our wide group of listeners. As I said before in the opening, you've been campaigning for a very long time. How the hell did you get into campaigning in the Northern Territory and working for the Labor Party?
Well, I guess like most people in the Northern Territory, it happened being door-knocked by the local candidate. I was home during the uni holidays from QT back in Darwin, trying to watch the Collingwood Magpies play a game on a TV screen where the antenna wasn't working. So this was back when antennas were on TVs. And I got a knock at the door, and it was a young candidate looking for the seat of Wangari named Paul Henderson. Was searching for election, and he door knocked me. Must have seen something in me. Kept contacting me. Started volunteering for him, and ended up working for him. And the rest is history. So it was one of those classic Darwin stories about getting to know people, which I think we'll talk about a lot today, about the localness of the Northern Territory.
We certainly will. And not only have you done that, obviously, it led you to go over to the United States and pique your intellectual campaign curiosity. Tell us a bit about some of the experiences you've had over there.
Yeah, well, I guess getting into the Labor Party and politics, I started to really focus down into what did I like most about politics. Helping people was obviously the core value, but I wanted to know how I could do that the right way. I had an interest in numbers, and I wanted to sort of quantify how I could do this better. And through good contacts in the party, I was given an opportunity to go work on the Minnesota Senator Al Franken's campaign back in 2014. And part of that was to go through the Wellstone Institute sort of campaign training, the organising model, which was just mind-blowing for me, because it had absolutely just crystallized everything I kind of knew in the back of my head, and to sort of give it a framework, give it a reason, and say, yes, you're on the right track, Ryan. This is actually the right way to help people, was just so satisfying. And then obviously to come back and sort of engage with you, because I'd seen you on your journey on the Obama campaign, and start talking to you about how we could make this happen in the 2016 election in the Northern Territory was a real catalyst for me, and really came together. So it was fantastic to do that and get that experience.
And am I correct in? Did I read that the other day that the running mate for Vice President Harris, Tim Walsh, he is a product of the Wellstone program, right?
He is indeed, and I have to check my records, but I'm pretty sure I might have a sneaky photo with him somewhere with my time in 2014. So I'll have to pull that out of the old memory banks and put that on Facebook when I get a chance, if I can find it.
Hell yeah! Okay, very good. So you for the folks out there, Ryan is the real shit. That's the take-home message here for those campaigners. Okay, that's why we've got him on the pod. Okay, so before we dive into some of the dry stuff, I actually want to talk about the colour and the movement of a Northern Territory election campaign. As early as the early 2000s, I had friends who had gone up to the NT and worked on earlier campaigns, and they'd come home and said, Stephen, if there's one thing you need to do in terms of your campaign bucket list, at least once you must do a Northern Territory campaign, because it is just so unique and diverse and fun and loose and raw, all of those things. And so it's something that I had wanted to do. And I thought to myself, if I ever did have that opportunity, that I would take that up. And I did in 2016 when I was working for the Vic branch. And it was obviously after we'd won the 2014 down here in Victoria. And I was kind of on a bit of a, Paul's letter to the Romans or Corinthians, spreading the gospel, right? And you're important in that, Ryan, because
I was happy to receive that message.
Yeah,
Stephen.
You're a fellow traveller, right? So I don't know if I continue this sort of Christian kind of mythology. Maybe you're in the school of Antioch or something. Anyway, and so I get up there, and do you know what? It was wonderful. It really was. Here are the key memories for me. Sitting on the sort of the deck there at the Coconut Grove campaign office of an evening, while there's a huge phone bank going on both inside and outside because we couldn't fit everyone, and competing with, and anyone knows Coconut Grove's right next to Darwin Airport. Darwin Airport isn't just a commercial airport, it's also a military base. Do they still do that military operation? What's it called?
Operation Pitch Black, yep. Just finished last week.
Right, okay. And it's just all of these like F-15s and Super Hornets at night taking off, and they fly off into the desert and do their things and stuff. But it's, I just remember and the sun's going down and I'm having a beer. It's like 24 degrees. We're making calls or winning votes. It's such a great memory. I loved it. But also the funny stuff like Gunner's speech on election night. And remember when we used to do Facebook Lives? I had the phone plugged into the NT Labor Facebook page doing Facebook Live, holding up the camera with my hand. But his speech literally went for an hour and my arm was about to fall off. And I'm like going, oh my God, Michael, just wrap it up. We won. Like, people want to have a beer. What else was going on? Like, even hearing about some of the canvassers who were going out into the remote communities, people from Victoria had never door knocked and I'll get to this point in a moment, never door knocked, and I say that air quotes, in remote communities. And the very first door they knocked, someone said, mate, you door knock like a copper. And he said, what do you mean? He goes, don't door knock. And he said, well, how will I get people's attention? He says, just yell out, yo, yo. And then someone will yell out, yo, yo. And then they'll start having a chat. And he said that he did that to the next door. He's like, this is not going to work. And he literally didn't knock the door. He just yelled out, yo, yo. And then someone yelled back, yo, yo. And next minute they come in a bit of a yarn. And, new friendships were made and new votes were won. Like, it just, this sort of stuff, it's just beautiful campaigning. I want to get a sense of what you love, Ryan, about campaign. Sell it to the Labor people out there who have never got on a Labor campaign up in the NT, why you need to come up and do this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's the best time of year. It's the dry season. It's fantastic. We'll get into it a bit later. There's small electorates. So it really is 5,000-6,000 people per electorate that you are knocking on doors, and you will make connections with these people as you go through the electorate multiple times. But yes, I've got memories. And you're so diverse from, down in Central Australia where you're, I remember driving down, not a road, but a dry riverbed to get from one community to the next. That was the only way to get there and get the vote out. And other times, getting out the vote, which involved, having a list of all the voters in town and chasing people up, troop carriers saying, "Do you want to lift down to the polling booth?" and all this sort of fun stuff. So it's just been fantastic. All the stories about the lots of dogs in the Northern Territory and lots of big fences, and thank goodness for those fences. But yeah, lots of hilarious stories about those times. But I think it's always been. The Territory's always been about connections. It's always been a small place in terms of voters. So it actually has always been about the personal connection. I think one of the hardest things was to convince politicians up here that to let a volunteer do a door knock for them, because they were just like, no, they need to meet me, which kind of runs counter to any other sort of campaigning that you're normally with. The candidate's the last person who wants to get out there and hit the doors. Well, in the NT, it's like they sometimes want to resist volunteers happening because they want to have all those connections and all those door knocks. So it really is personal politics at the most extreme level. And you win over the right family or annoy the wrong family, and you might have a couple percentage points going either way.
It's unbelievable. And the other thing I will say to those not familiar, on election night, I'm assuming the ABC will do a coverage, watch the ABC coverage or watch the election night coverage, because it's priceless. And watch the background when they cut to different campaigns. There's always the colour and movement of when they go to, let's go to Port Darwin and just talk to the candidate there or whatever. Watch what's going on in the background. A lot of times these campaign parties are in pubs and there's people who are not even associated to the campaign. I just think it's really funny stuff, and it kind of gives you a bit of a window into what it's like. It's just pretty relaxed. It's pretty loose. It's pretty chill. The last campaign, I can't remember, like the opposition leader gave her concession speech on a stage with a massive Jim Beam sign behind it, because I think that was the only place they could do it. And there was sort of balloons for someone's 21st bobbling in the background. Like, no advances had set this up. It was just like, I think you just go stand over there. That'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Oh, it's so small. It's like the resources. I think I was listening to your Tasmanian colleague the other day talking about there's not many people around to sort of activate. So it is actually it's whoever you can do. Like having to being a staffer from 9 to 5 and then going out and being a volunteer from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. is just the things you got to do.
Yeah.
You've got to make do with those numbers.
You do. So let's talk about specifically the uniqueness of the electorate, because you do talk about the size of the population, voting population. It is incredibly small, but also there are other uniquenesses as well, in that the Northern Territory is a big place, and some of these electorates, whilst are small in numbers, are very big in size, and there are remote communities. What challenges does that present to a campaign when considering the turf that they needed to engage and organise around?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's remote electorates, of which there's about 7. And to put in context, I was doing a bit of compare and contrast, and the seat of Barkly has 6,000 voters, and it is bigger than Germany. And you've got to try and get around and plan out within a 2-week schedule about how you're going to get around to all those major communities to try and get everyone a chance to vote and where they need to vote. Because if the Electoral Commission's not going there, they don't get a chance. So they have a thing called mobile polling in the Northern Territory where, and this started yesterday on Monday, where essentially the Electoral Commission will go from community to community driving or flying in some places because it's you can't reach it otherwise, and we'll open a booth for 45 minutes in that community. Everyone will line up, everyone will have their vote, and off they go. And so the political parties need to do 2 things. They need to be travelling in advance of the Electoral Commission to try and get their supporters ready and know that the Electoral Commission is coming, to get them ready and get out the how to votes and make sure everyone's around. Then be there at the same time the Electoral Commission is to be scrutineering and ensuring that people do what they do. And then you've got to do it all over again. So it's like this massive game of sort of leapfrog where you just sort of constantly got 2 teams going. And then things happen, right? Like planes break down, storms happen. There might be a bushfire that cuts off a community. So you're just on the day trying to react to this vast distances where you might have to ask someone to drive overnight 8 or 9 hours to get to the next polling booth in time to get those 30 or 40 votes in that community because you've got no one else to do it.
And this was, I remember in 2016, because I saw you towards the start. I don't know, I was up there for 2 months or something. And I saw you obviously at the start of the campaign. And then there was like, Ryan's going now and we won't see him for like, 3 weeks. I was like, okay, bye, Ryan. And that was your job. But talk to us about how important it's not just turning up at the last minute and saying, vote for the Labor candidate. The relationships that exist on the ground is critically important, particularly for Labor. In previous election campaigns, we've been caught with our pants down a little bit, and it's something that I know that you guys have made an effort to never happen again, right? So just talk about how important that is in terms of turning out that vote and building that relationship with Labor voters in those communities.
Oh, absolutely. I think there has been a very strong relationship with Territory Labor and Aboriginal remote Aboriginal Territorians ever since Gough Whitlam and Vincent Lingiari shared that iconic image around land rights, right? And that has been going on for a long time, that Aboriginal people put their trust in Labor. It became apparent to us in 2012 when we lost the election. It wasn't lost in the cities, it was lost in the bush, because for the first time, in my view, we'd taken the Aboriginal vote for granted. And I think we got smacked on the nose appropriately. It was about, we had lost those connections. There was a combination of things. It used to be that you could rely on the local school teacher or nurse or whoever was a Labor Party union official who would also help organise. You'd have long-term relationships with Aboriginal elders who would have that trust. And as those people moved away or died off, those connections started to wane. And I think Aboriginal people have sort of moved on a little bit from land rights. It's what's next. Like land rights was important, but what is next? We're seeing we're entering in this post-land claim era of native title in the Northern Territory, and people want to see what I think there's a lot of Aboriginal people saying we want to activate our land the way we want to do it. We just don't want to write it away to some mining companies. Some might want to do that, but some want to get into like ecotourism or other sorts of things. So I think Labor's at the moment talking a lot about housing and overcrowding as it's sort of its conversation with Aboriginal people, which the CLP sort of did not do, hence being thrown back out 4 years later. But I think there's a broader, bigger conversation around what are we doing for Aboriginal people in those remote communities, and I think Labor's the best party to do that. It really is about trying to make those connections. So it's right. So it's a combination of having that long-term connection and that sharing that journey, that shared vision. And I think we're in this interesting period now where there's other political parties and other activists sort of taking over that shared journey and shared vision. And I think it's Labor's job to get back into that. And I think we can do that. It's just about having the time and the subjects to talk about. So it's a big question, but I feel that there's a lot of good Labor politicians out there who can absolutely crack that nut and find out what those answers are going forward.
Let's set the scene for our listeners in terms of pathway to government. How many seats are? I mean, it's one chamber, and
yes.
How many seats do you need to form government? What's the magic number?
13 is the magic number. 25 seats.
And Labor currently, I'm testing here because I'm just bringing up Wikipedia. Labor has
14.
Yep, 14. And the CLP, the Country Liberal Party, as they're called up in the Territory, has got 7. So there's a swing of 6 needed to form at this election. And anything else before we talk about the leaders that folks need to know? Maybe talk about the makeup of the electorate. Like, what does it look like in terms of where the sort of battleground areas are?
Yeah, so you've got, there's kind of like 5 major regions in the Northern Territory where you've got the bush seats, those big broad seats that are majority Aboriginal voters. You've got the northern suburbs, which is considered if you win the northern suburbs, you win government type conversation. It's the real battleground area, but it hasn't been for about 24 years. You've got inner city Darwin, which is, is 3 seats there. You've got a satellite city called Palmerston, which is kind of that mortgage stress, working class type level. And then you've got these regional town seats of Alice Springs, Katherine and the rural area. And they're sort of, they're experiencing, a lot of those issues that those smaller towns in Australia are experiencing at the moment in terms of economic stagnation and so forth. So you've sort of got 5 sort of broad universes that you need to address. If you, all things being equal, sort of Labor takes the bush seats, the CLP take those regional seats, Palmerston tends towards the CLP, and then those Darwin seats in the inner city and the suburbs become the key to victory to get to 13. So your electoral math is about how do you balance those? How do you get to 13 using those sort of 5 big universes and try to get to 13 seats out of them? And it comes down to local members, because at the end of the day, they don't swing universally. They get talked about as, pretty homogenous, but it really does come down to personal connection. So you're trying to find the right people to connect with those people in those universes that match up and can take you to victory.
Okay, excellent. You've set the scene for us now. So let's get a sense of where Labor's journey has been in government since Michael Gunner, who was the Chief Minister that was first elected in a landslide election victory on an excellent campaign in 2016. And Michael, in his leadership, saw the territory through COVID.
Yep.
And then decided to retire from politics. And at that moment, I just want to get a sense from you about how Labor has gone governing. Obviously, they've gone through a couple of leaders, and how it's placed heading into this particular poll.
Yeah, so I think it's probably fair to say that the stagnation of the economy is sort of reflecting badly on the government of the day, which has just sort of meant that some major projects that have been spoken about for a long time just haven't landed in the sort of timeframes that they would like. I still think they will happen, and they'll be big game changers for the territory. But as people know, the economy is always a major theme for any sort of voter. So I think Natasha Files came in as the Chief Minister to replace Michael Gunner. She very much kept the same trajectory as on the economy, and then essentially got caught up in a big law and order debate where it was very much became the CLP's plan was to really campaign on law and order, because it's my view that something happened post-COVID in terms of alcohol out in the bush and turning that into sort of alcohol-related violence, and that sort of wasn't sort of handled as quickly as probably the voters wanted to. And then through a series of unfortunate events, Tash had to step down through some having some shares with a mining company in the Northern Territory. So there was a feeling that there was a bit of a lack of direction. Eva Lawler has stepped up and been a bit of fresh air for a lot of voters in the Territory. She paints herself as not a politician. She got into politics because she doesn't like politics, is one of her things, and she just brings a common sense approach to the whole thing, which I think that real clear talking has really cut through with the electorate. So where it was probably fair to say that Labor was probably sliding slowly out, like most governments tend to do when they're in their second, going for their third term. I think Eva's definitely rebalanced the ship to give them a fighting chance for the election in 12 days' time.
In 12 days, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Was elected in 2016, the 2016 election, in a seat that Labor needed to win. Like, it was one of those many sort of Darwin seats that Labor needed to pick up if it was going to form government, and she did.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like you get to know lots of people in the Labor Party universe about demographics, right? And Palmerston should, by all means, any demographer looks at Palmerston and goes, "This should be a Labor heartland. Why isn't it?" And it's because of the local members. Like people might remember Terry Mills, a long time sort of CLP member, tried his own party for a little while and failed. Like, he held a seat that on the demographics should have been Labor for 20 years because of that local member. Connection, because as a principal and just working those electorates. So it was great for the first time to actually have some Labor members in Palmerston to sort of make those connections. And I think Eva's the first Labor member to ever win and then hold a Palmerston seat for the first time, which is a testament to her local member strengths. And it's just about if she can convert that to that Chief Minister level for the people of the Northern Territory as a whole.
Let's talk about the Country Liberal Party leader, and I was practicing this before the show, and I'm going to butcher a beautiful Italian surname here, Leah Finocchiario.
Leah Finocchiaro, yes.
Oh, okay. I should have
Very
dropped that.
close.
Almost dropped the I. She took the CLP to an election defeat at the last election. I do recall her giving her concession speech, and I actually was reasonably, it's very rarely do I say anything positive about a Tory on this podcast, but I actually found her concession speech impressive, and it was very much framing her remarks and centering them on the people of the Northern Territory. And I thought, if you can keep that up over the next 4 years, you are going to be a formidable opponent in 4 years' time. Disappointingly, she is still the leader, and I thought she kind of, knowing Northern Territory politics, I figured she was going to get knifed, and then someone else would get knifed, and then someone else would get knifed, and they'd go through 6 or 7 different leaders before we get here. But she has stood the test of time and is running for the leadership. Sorry, running for the chief minister in this election. Just give us some background on the CLP leader.
Yeah, so obviously Leah Finocchiaro, Italian heritage. Eva Lawler, also Italian heritage. In fact, I think so. We've got 2 Italian women going up against. I think it's only the 3rd time in Australian history that the 2 leaders have been female. So that's great that we're seeing that in the Northern Territory. But isn't politics funny? CLP got reduced to 2 seats in the 2016 election. Out of 25, they had 2 seats. There was a ballot between the 2 of them, and Leah lost, was the deputy. She then the leader stood down, retired. Gary Higgins retired, so Leah became the leader by default. She was the only one left. She managed to pick up 6 or 7 seats in an election which actually delivered less votes than Adam Giles got in the 2012 loss. So it just shows you how you can get less votes than you get when you get 2 seats and still manage to get 8 because of those small electorates and the swings being in the right places. She's gone on and held on to the leadership, I think, by being a very disciplined opponent in terms of she's one message on law and order, very small target strategy and everything else. She has lost 3 by-elections in this 4-year period, and her colleagues have just decided that she's the one for them. I'm not sure how that's going to translate on election night, but it's very, very interesting that you can essentially deliver less votes than one of the most hated leaders of all time in Adam Giles, inherit the leadership because the only one left, and somehow be touted as the future chief minister. That just shows you how it works. And to her credit, she was absolutely one of those members who delivered a swing to herself against those landslide towards Michael Gunner in 2016, which just shows if you're a good local member. I think she read the tea leaves early around that government and said, "I'll just disassociate myself." And people can do that quite easily up here if they just target those 5,000 to 6,000 people that are in their patch.
Just actually one clarifying question here. If there was 2 people voting for the leadership and she lost, does that mean that she didn't vote for herself? Because I would argue that would be a tie.
I wasn't privy to the internal machinations, but that's all we know.
Okay, we'll leave that there. Okay, let's talk about the issues that are shaping this race. What are the sort of top 3 or 4 issues that are front of mind for these voters as they go into the polls on Saturday, the 24th of August?
Well, as much as I'd hate to admit it, it's crime. There is crime is by far and away the number one issue in Territorians' minds. Normally the pulse of the electorate is crime does rear its head in the Territory during the wet season when people are grumpy and irritable, or when the economy is not going so well and they're people looking for things to blame. To the credit, the CLP have kept that front and centre the whole way through. Normally, by August, people are enjoying themselves and have completely forgotten about crime that hasn't happened in this cycle at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what it is. It'll be testing my long-held thesis that crime actually doesn't win elections in the Northern Territory. It's a big furphy and a big red herring. The CLP have ran on crime as their central piece in every election since 2001 and have lost all but one, and that was 2012, and that was when the Bush deserted Labor to give CLP a chance. It wasn't about law and order at all. So we'll see if finally my thesis of law and order is just the CLP talking to its base is true or not come this election. The other big issue is the economy. Obviously, both parties are very strong on their support of onshore gas or fracking as the future industry for the Northern Territory. People might remember it went through a moratorium up here. That was a way for Michael Gunner to actually understand the issue. Let's do an independent moratorium to understand and actually do it the safest way. So I think it's fair to say that, the controls in place, it'll be the most stringent, best-in-class practices of onshore gas drilling in the world if it does emerge here. Territorians understand gas. They've been run by gas since the 70s, so there is a high understanding of the gas industry. INPEX is an offshore gas industry, happens in Darwin Harbour, so there's a big understanding around gas as an energy source and as a transition fuel to renewables, and I think that's where the teals and the greens will try and make themselves known in some of those areas. I think it's important to note that on average, there's a 30% turnover in electorates between 4-year cycles. So 30% of the electorate are brand new, mostly interstate people who've come in for a job. So they might be bringing in those preconceived notions of how they see gas from an East Coast perspective, and not understanding what the Territorians do understand, which is it's a transition fuel and it's a key job creator. When you look at a seat like Port Darwin, in some electoral cycles, we've seen turnover as high as 90%. So, only 10% of the electorate voted for the incumbent. So you really do lose that incumbency in a city seat like Port Darwin. So that's the contest, and it'll be interesting to see what that changeover does and those messages. So that'll be an interesting 3-corner contest, I think, in a couple of seats.
Can I ask you about the fracking stuff? And obviously,
Yep.
Our listeners in Victoria will know that Daniel Andrews banned fracking in his first term. So that's our kind of relationship with this type of gas exploration. Is there a contrast between the Labor Party and the CLP on fracking, or are they both in favour of it? And it's just so the issue is we're worried about an attack from our left flank for those inner city areas like Port Darwin?
Well, I think the difference is I think both major parties will go ahead with fracking. I think the difference for Green and left-leaning voters will be that Labor will ensure that those environmental protections stay in place. The CLP would probably try and seek to expedite things as quickly as possible, and that would be the risk. So that's I guess the decision that the voters have to make around. It is about who do you want holding the levers when it comes to putting this industry forward? Ones that actually do believe in the environmental controls, or ones that do not. So that'll be a choice for those voters to make, because it's full preferential voting up here. You can't just vote one. You've got to vote the entire ticket.
Good. I hate that they have that in New South Wales. It just drives me insane. I don't. Anyway. Okay. Any other issues that we need to be mindful of going to this poll?
I think the sleeping issue for me out bush is the results of the Voice referendum. I think there has been a couple of interesting nuances that have happened out there. So people may not realise that when auto enrolment came in Australia, which basically means you update your licence or your power or whatever, the Electoral Commission automatically gets to update you on your new place of residence. Fantastic. What people didn't realise is that only ever existed where there was postal to the home service. So, 33% of the territory doesn't have postal service to the home, and they are all Aboriginal remote communities. So ever since Kevin Rudd introduced it, I've been campaigning with federal Labor members and whoever will listen to me around making sure that auto enrolment goes into those communities. Thankfully, that was done as a way to get that happening. And what we saw was 400 to 500 Aboriginal voters in each of those remote communities getting onto the roll for the first time, which is fantastic for an enfranchisement of that electorship. So. And we've got 2 CLP seats there that are held by 5 votes and 25 votes respectively, Barkly and Namatjira. And those candidates have to front up to those communities with another 500 voters in saying, yes, I am part of Jacinta Price's team that voted no to the Voice. Very, very hard sleeper issue that I think might give Labor a bit of a head start in a couple of key seats there. So I think that's the there's always an issue that you never saw coming, and that's my pick for that. That's what it's going to be in the bush.
Okay, interesting. The circling back to the top of the conversation here about issues, you talked about crime, and I always want to get a sense of, obviously, I can picture how the CLP would frame their argument about crime, but how is Labor, from a government standpoint, trying to address that and head that off? And obviously, I'm assuming they don't want to talk about this particular issue, but you can't just completely ignore it. So how are they trying to manage this?
Oh, they're talking about it. I guess the biggest issue has been that Eva I think Eva has shown that she just wants to address crime. So people probably know that for the first time, curfews were introduced in Alice Springs as a way to curb violence in the town of Alice Springs. That got legislated. So it's a tool now for the police to use. It very much, I think, people that have been in the territory for a long time understand that this is not a silver bullet issue. There's a lot of social factors that go into the reasons why we have so much antisocial behaviour and youth-related crime in the Northern Territory. And it's my personal view that, your approach to your understanding of law and order and crime is a result of your learnings. You're not going to change a left-leaning voter. They're going to understand it's rehabilitation. A right-wing voter is going to want to do punishment. That's just a left brain, right brain thing that's happening. The only really time that I think you see people switch sides, in my view, is when they are a direct incident of crime happens to them. Either a left-leaning voter gets broken into and experiences it, may pivot to the other side, or alternatively, a right-wing voter might see the injustices of the punishment system of a family member and go, this isn't right. And they're the only times I think that people switch sides, in my view. So that goes to my long-held view that it's a push-button issue. It sells papers, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change votes. I've held that for a long time, and I hope it's right and holds steady. That I think most people understand that it's a very complex issue up here, and it can't be solved with punitive legislative measures. It's not going to address the issue. There's bigger conversations at play here that need to go into fixing these generationally.
You talked about, you mentioned the teals, which has surprised me. I know there's always been a culture of, minor parties in the Northern Territory. So maybe we can talk a bit about minor parties more broadly. But I mean, is there a teal type campaign being run there that's been, or is it just independents have said, I'm just going to wear that colour?
Yeah. It's left-leaning candidates, I think, putting themselves up without the Green Party mandate behind them. So you've got Justine somebody or other in Johnston. You've got the former Lord Mayor Graham Sawyer running in Wanguri, who came to fame for his hunting cane toads under Frog Watch. So you've got these sort of green tinge candidates not affiliated to the Green Party running, and it's not an official teal effort. I know they were sniffing around to see if they could find some candidates. I don't think they did, but there's definitely people that are positioning themselves like that as a left-wing alternative, which I think, as a general rule, benefits Labor. I think there's a release valve pressure there, so people might not be wanting to vote Labor, number one, because they're a bit frustrated over the last 4 years, so they can vote for a green or a teal and then put Labor number two and the vote comes back. I think in those sort of two-horse races, it might be a bit harder, that they've got, some voters are going to have a hard choice of, I'm not happy with Labor. I don't actually think CLP have anything past their attack on law and order, and it might just come down to that local member relationship.
It always does. It's so critical.
Yep.
It's so critical. I want to talk about the path to victory in a moment, but before we do, let's just talk a bit about polling in the Northern Territory. That's one thing that I discovered when I did come up, is that it's a really hard place to poll. And so therefore you're not flying blind, but your windshield is really, really dirty. And just talk us through why it is difficult to poll.
Yeah, you can't poll with any sense of anything being realistic in the Northern Territory. Like, you need a sample size to get a relative sample size of 300 to poll an electorate of 5,000-6,000. You are in the field forever. You'll never get it. I've never seen a poll that's managed to get even close to 200 sample sizes for an electorate. So you really do have to sort of go up a level into those regions that I spoke about before, and it just gives you a sense check. So it might say that, it's 45, 55, 2 pp, but then you've got to overlap. That's just a raw political party number that could be dealt, and then you've got to think about all the local member influences and all that. I think it used to be that we used to think local member vote was worth 5% in the NT, like having dug into it for 20 plus years. I reckon it's somewhere between 15 to 20%. It is that high. Like you are essentially paid all day, every day to go to Parliament 33 days a year, and the rest of it if you can convince one voter a day to trust you, then you cannot lose. And we see that time and time again with independent members being members for 20 plus years, and local members belonging to parties that do resist massive shifts in electoral fortunes.
So there has been some polls, though, hasn't there? What are we? So I guess what I wanted to say is there's a caveat to folks about we're about to talk about polling. But what polls have been done, and what have we learned from this thus far?
So I think there was a poll by Cosmaris early on in the year that essentially gave a bit of a wipeout number to Labor, which was 20% primary. And I think then there was a Freshwater poll a couple of months ago that sort of got it back to a sort of, I think 40% or something like that. So generally speaking, I think 46, yeah, 46, 54. So it was a 9%. Yeah, that was a 9% swing against Labor on a 2PP, which, if you go to the pendulum, doesn't give the CLP 13 seats, quite frankly. So, and there won't be a uniform swing because a lot of those seats in that 9% margin are bush seats, which just cannot be polled in any shape or form. So it's one of those things where I think it basically aligns with the thinking from all the pundits. Is there, Labor hasn't covered itself in glory, but the CLP haven't done anything to give voters the confidence that they need to transition to them. So it really will come down to local members, local issues, and turnout, and crazy independents and where their votes go.
So let's talk about some of those seats what are the ones that you're going to be watching on election night that we all should be watching as well? And maybe we'll break it down into those three zones that you talked about. Maybe we'll leave Darwin. Do we leave Darwin to the end, or we talk about Darwin first? I guess it's probably the most important, isn't it, really? Maybe let's do Darwin first as one of the areas that we need to look at.
So I guess the first two that you would look at is Port Darwin and Fong Lim. They are both inner city electorates, around 1.9 and 2.2% each. Obviously, if CLP have any chance to try and form a government, they need to try and take those seats. Port Darwin has lost its incumbent in Paul Kirby, so that again makes it hard. Replaced by Brian Manning, a long-term school teacher everyone in Darwin knows, and it's just hopeful that a lot of those people who do know him are in his electorate. And then you've got Fong Lim, which is Mark Monaghan, who again is got elected and has been working that electorate hard, and has recently become the education minister and other portfolios. They all have about 9 or 10 portfolios each up here when they make it to the ministry.
Another uniqueness of Northern Territory politics. And Port Darwin, 2.1% margin for Labor. That's the electorate you said before that basically changes 90% of its electors.
Sometimes, yeah.
It's kind of like organising McDonald's. Go in 1 week, sign them everyone up, and go back a week later, and there's a whole new staff there. Okay, and Fong Lim, remind me where Fong Lim is within the sort of Darwin area.
Yes, inner city, neighbours Port Darwin, so that's Stewart Park area. Yep.
Okay. Very good.
Bayview.
Then what are you looking at in terms of? Are they just the 2 seats in Darwin that we're worried about, or?
Well, if the CLP want to form government through traditional means, then the next sort of 3 seats of cabs off the rank is Drysdale, which is the Chief Minister's seat, Eva Lawler's. That's 5.4%. So, all that. They would be looking at that about just trying to see if they could pick that off the leader. Obviously, when the leader seat normally does get a bit of a bump, from the profile and all that sort of stuff, hard to poll as well as that seat. So, there's a lot of people thinking that Eva will hold, but obviously the CLP would think that has to be in their targets to get to 13. Karama's is 8%, so it's the next cab off the rank. In terms of that is a sort of an outer northern suburb seat that sort of is close to the satellite city of Palmerston, so a bit lower class socioeconomical than its northern suburb neighbours, but very strong, hardworking member in Nari Kit there, who works one of the really hard on those sort of housing commission sort of complexes and long-term people, so that it's hard to understand that turnout, and if she can turn out those voters, she'll be all right. And then you've got Fanny Bay, which is Michael Gunner's old seat, now held by Brent Potter, who picked it up in a by-election. So the by-election margin is a lot closer than the electoral margin of 10%, but again, hard to tell whether they, did they get the high watermark at that by-election, or is Brent going to get a sophomore surge? All reports is he's done all the work that the local members. Fanny Bay always has a rich tradition of picking. Getting behind its local members. It's had 3 chief ministers: Marshall Perrin, Claire Martin, and Michael Gunner. So it's if you can work that electorate and get them to trust you, you can have a long career in politics.
Then zone 2, which would be, I would say, more of the remote communities. Are there any particular seats there that we need to keep an eye on?
Well, I think it's while Arafura and Daly are probably the closest in margins, I think both were picked up in by-elections. So Manny Brown in Arafura after the passing of Labor legend Lawrence Costa, and Duran Young picked up Daly. It's the first time, I think, in history that government has picked up a seat off opposition in a second term. That was the retiring old CLP leader Gary Higgins retired, and Duran Young picked that up. Actually, it got handed over in the general election, and the new member quit about a year in, and Duran picked that up. So it was, again, you don't often see governments pick up seats off opposition, but he managed to do that. It's a really diverse electorate in terms of it's got one of the largest remote communities in the territory of Wadair. A whole bunch of communities then starts going to that rural area of Berry Springs and other places. So that would be. The CLP would look to target that, but my instinct is that the Bush will be going in Labor's favour, because they are just much better campaigners out there when it comes to they've got all the infrastructure out there about knowing how to turn out the vote, who to talk to, get all those language speakers on the booths and all that sort of stuff. So my actual view is, if you want to see if it's going the other way for the Labor faithful, is keep an eye on Barkly and Namatjira, which are CLP held seats. Barkly was 5 votes at the last election. Namatjira was 25 votes. And going to my previous point, all those new electors coming onto the roll for the first time, if Labor can activate those voters and make sure they turn out, then that's a very big margin that could go Labor's way. And all of a sudden that makes the pathway to 13 a hell of a lot harder for the CLP if the Labor begins by getting 2 extra on their pile. I guess the point to make is, these 7 Bush seats, it's over by next Friday. Like, they're mobile polling now.
Yeah.
They are done by next Friday, and all the votes just sit there ready to count first thing Saturday at 6 p.m. So, and very good scrutineers can tell you quite easily what the rough count is, and you can get smart people are tracking those numbers, and I can tell you, like, from some fresh mail for your listeners, it's going really, really well in the Barkly at the moment, in terms of for the Labor candidate Lizzie Hogan down there. So if she can keep that up in other communities, I would be very worried if I was the CLP.
That's interesting. So Barkly and Namatjira are the 2 seats that folks should keep an eye on election night, particularly early doors when the count's coming in, to take off of the CLP. Any other seats that are in zone 3 then that you wanted to sort of draw our attention to?
Well, I guess I think there's 4 independent held seats at the moment in the chamber.
Didn't we hold Blaine?
We did. Blaine is now Mark Turner's still the member. He's no longer a member of the Labor Party, and so, but all reports are is he has done a remarkable local member job, and both sides are telling me that they think he's going to hold on, which is really, really interesting. So it just goes against all sort of common knowledge of how politics works, but I haven't had anyone tell me he's toast, which is really, really interesting.
Okay.
He's 6'8" and got a huge beard, so it's just that presence thing I think helps get him connecting to people, and he'll spend an hour talking to someone.
He looks like I mean, I've never met the man before in my entire life, but he looks like if Ned Kelly shagged a basketball player.
with a London accent.
Okay, there you go, with a London accent. Fair enough. All right, so just to summarise, Barclay and Namatjira are the two seats we'd look to take off of the Tories on election night. And in terms of the Darwin seats that we need to keep an eye on in terms of our pile, Port Darwin, Fong Lim, worst case scenario, Drysdale. And in terms of the remote communities, we're looking at, was it Arnhem, Drysdale? And
I think it's two paths. Like if I'm wrong on the bush stuff, then you've got to keep an eye on Arafura and Daly, but I don't think so. But
Arafura and Daly, yeah.
If it's a generic swinging in the urban centres, then it's Karama and Fanny Bay you've got to keep an eye on. So if they hold, what that says to me is that there's no pathway to 13 for CLP, and that means that Labor's got more chances of forming government, be it 13 in their own right or relationships with those independent members, that I think there will be more pathways to 13 for Labor at the end of the night than the CLP. But this is all with a big grain of salt, because obviously in the Territory, unless you are on the ground and having that observing every personal connection with every candidate and every voter, there's just every election you find, there's just some result that just springs out of nowhere that no one saw coming. And then they tell you, oh yeah, that's because they resigned from their job 22 years ago and campaigned for 8 hours straight. It's like, that would have been great information to know. So it's just one of those things. Whereas there'll be some seat that no one saw coming, some result on the night. Is always the way. And I remember Alison Anderson once got a swing to herself of 27% when she went from Labor to Liberals and back again. So you just never know how it's going to go.
One area that we haven't spoken about, correct me if I'm wrong, Alice Springs.
Yep.
I know that in the high watermark of the 2016 campaign, we won seats in Dale Wakefield, right? She won.
Yeah, won Breitling.
Yeah,
beat Adam Giles. Yeah, he was unseated the chief minister. Fantastic.
That was what I like to call is the stuff of Labor dreams that happens on election nights when we are absolutely crushing it. Any intel on how we're tracking in the Alice?
Well, it's interesting because, like, the CLP do absolutely see Alice Springs as their heartland. But if you look at the history of it, there's always independent members. There's always upsets. Robin Lamley is an independent member there in Araluen. Josh Burgoyne holds Breitling by, I think it's less than 200 votes. And, now we're looking at Namatjira coming back into the hands of Labor, because it's half Alice Springs, half bush. There's the numbers man in me goes again and going, if you look at the demographics, this place is trending towards Labor over time, and we're seeing that with more independent members winning in Alice Springs. So I think Alice Springs, if not already, will be majority Aboriginal within a couple of election cycles, which just changes the whole complexion of the seats, right? So it's one of those ones where it might be that the tide's already gone out and it's just waiting for those incumbents to go, and then it will be a sea change to a new world order. The Greens have a very big presence there in Breitling, so a lot of desert change people go to Alice Springs and have their experience. So there's always new blood coming through there and sort of working that through. So Alice Springs is a fascinating one because it really is CLP going, yep, it's our heartland, but you look at who wins the seats all the time. It's not so often the case.
It's soft. Okay, super interesting. Any other final reflections before we wrap? This has been an excellent podcast. Very efficient as well, Ryan. I loved how you ripped through this in less than an hour.
Well, no, I think we've covered most of it. I think it's going to be one of those. I think the reflection for me is so many people have come up to me and said, I just don't know what's going to happen, which I've never had before. I think there was a lot of people who thought Labor was done and dusted, 6 to 8 months ago, and that has completely changed now under Eva's common sense approach, which is really connecting with the voters. And then, it's I think the tactical decisions by Labor in terms of where they're going for their pathway to 13's been smart. I think the CLP have run the risk of running a small campaign, and that can backfire sometimes when you run too small, that you just haven't given enough experience. So it really is interesting. I just, if there's a landslide either way, it was, the real winners of this one is the electorate, because they kept their cards close to their chest and weren't telling anyone what was happening.
Fascinating. Well, it's going to all unfold for us in a week's time, Saturday, 24th of August. Watch the ABC. I remember previously, like last campaign, I think I just sat there and no one was tweeting about the results, and I think I was hitting up you and a bunch of others about what was going on in the booths. So maybe I might do that again. Just pour myself a little whiskey and sit there and watch the TV and just annoy you, Ryan, so you can tell me what's going on and we can start punch out some stuff on Twitter.
Happy to do that, as long as we don't talk about the basketball.
Well, no, look, we did talk before the show that we could look. Next time we'll definitely talk about the basketball. Those Boston Celtics and Banner 18 came home. So happy, made my middle of the year. Anyway, Ryan Neve, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been fantastic to first of all just catch up with you for a while. We haven't spoken in a long time, but an incredibly insightful preview. And good luck to Labor and to Eva and the team in a week's time, and hopefully they bring it home, and another 4 years for Labor in the Northern Territory.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. It's been a blast.